I was 22 years old when I first realized that some things you see in war, you never unsee. Not the combat itself, though God knows that stays with you, but the aftermath, the things people leave behind when they know it's over. Iraq, 2006. We were clearing a compound outside Ramadi that had been used as an insurgent bomb-making facility. Standard sweep. Room to room, check every corner, watch for booby traps. My squad leader, Staff Sergeant Martinez, he was good at this. Patient, thorough. He'd been doing it since Fallujah. We found the bomb components in the first 2 rooms. Fertilizer, ball bearings, cell phone triggers, the usual shit. Then we opened a door in the back that led down. "Hold up," Martinez said, raising his fist. The smell hit us first. Chemical, sweet and wrong. Martinez looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly. Caution, maybe respect for whatever darkness humans are capable of creating when they think no one's watching. "Turner," he said to me, "you don't have to go down there if you don't want to." "Sergeant, I'm serious, Marine. Some things, once you see them, you carry them. I'm giving you a choice." I went down anyway. We all did, and he was right. What we found in those rooms, I'm not going to describe it here, but it wasn't just bomb making. They'd been testing their devices on animals, live animals, methodically, scientifically, taking notes. The point is this: when human beings decide that other living things are just subjects, just experiments, just means to an end, that's when they stop being human themselves. That's when they become something else, something worse. I thought about that basement in Ramadi a lot when I started researching what happened in the final days of Nazi Germany. Because the Third Reich had 12 years to perfect that transformation. 12 years of deciding that millions of people weren't really people, that suffering was data, that screams were just measurements. And in the last desperate weeks of April 1945, as the Soviet army closed in on Berlin, some of them were still working, still experimenting, still documenting. What the Soviet soldiers found beneath the streets of Berlin in those final days was beyond anything they'd prepared for. And what happened afterwards? That's a story that's been buried, sometimes literally, for 80 years. Until now. April 28, 1945. Berlin was dying. Captain Viktor Petrov of the 3rd Shock Army stood in what remained of Wilhelmstrasse, watching smoke rise from the Reichstag 6 blocks north. The building had been burning for 2 days. Around him, the city was a landscape from hell. Shattered buildings, bodies in the rubble, the constant crack of sniper fire echoing off broken walls. The smell was what got to you. Cordite and plaster dust, yes, but underneath, the sweet rot of death. Thousands of dead, German soldiers, civilians, Soviet troops, all mixing together in the spring warmth. Petrov had been fighting since Stalingrad. He thought he'd become numb to it. He was wrong. Comrade Captain, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov appeared from a doorway, ducking instinctively, though no shots had been fired in this sector for an hour. "We have something." Petrov turned. Volkov was young, 23, maybe 24, but he'd earned his commission the hard way, fighting through Poland and into Germany. His face was pale under the grime. "Another weapons cache?" "No, sir. You should see this yourself." They were clearing the government district building by building. According to intelligence reports from captured Wehrmacht officers, significant Nazi leadership had been using bunkers and underground facilities throughout this area. Hitler himself was supposedly dead, shot himself in his bunker just 2 days ago on April 26th, though Petrov wouldn't believe it until he saw the body. The building Volkov led him to had been an administrative office of some kind. The facade was relatively intact, which was rare. Most structures in central Berlin looked like they'd been chewed up and spit out. 5 stories of gray stone, windows blown out, but the walls still standing. Inside, Soviet soldiers were positioned at key points. Petrov recognized men from the 79th Rifle Corps, battle-hardened troops who'd been in Berlin since the first assault on April 16th. They looked nervous. That got his attention immediately. These men had fought through Zalo Heights, one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. They didn't spook easily. Sergeant Grigory Sokolov met them in what had been a lobby. Papers were scattered everywhere, desks overturned. Someone had built a small fire in the corner, probably German soldiers or civilians seeking warmth before they'd fled. "Where?" Petrov asked. "Basement, sir. We found a stairwell behind a collapsed section of wall. It goes down, way down." Petrov frowned. "How far?" "At least 3 levels, maybe more. The stairwell is intact, reinforced concrete. Military construction, not civilian. And there's something else." Sokolov gestured to a piece of twisted metal lying on the floor. It looked like part of a door frame. Petrov crouched to examine it. Heavy gauge steel, bent by force or explosion. But what caught his eye were the markings. SS runes and beneath them stenciled text. Streng Geheim, Führer's Sonderprojekt. Top secret, Führer Special Project. According to Anthony Beever's comprehensive account in The Fall of Berlin, 1945, the Soviets discovered numerous underground facilities in the final days of the battle. Most were command bunkers or storage facilities, but some, particularly those associated with SS operations, contained evidence of research programs that even hardened Soviet soldiers found disturbing. "Have you been down?" Petrov asked. 2 flights, Sokolov said. "There's a sealed door at the 2nd level. We tried to force it, but it's thick, very thick, and there's..." He hesitated. "There's a smell coming from down there, Comrade Captain. Not like upstairs, different." "Different how?" "Chemical, like a hospital maybe, or a laboratory. But underneath that, something else. Something wrong." Petrov had learned to trust a soldier's instincts. Men who'd survived 3 years of the Eastern Front knew when something was off. He looked at Volkov. "Get Lieutenant Belov and his NKVD detachment. If this is an SS facility, we do this by the book, and find someone who reads German. I want to know what we're walking into." "Sir," Sokolov said, "there's one more thing." "What?" "The power's still on down there. We can hear machinery running, humming, like generators or pumps. Whatever's down there, someone wanted it to keep functioning even after they left." A chill ran down Petrov's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Battle of Berlin had officially begun 12 days ago. The city had been encircled, bombarded, fought over street by street. The Reich was dead. Hitler was dead. Any rational person would have evacuated days ago. So who turned on the lights? "No one goes down until Belov arrives," Petrov ordered. "Post guards at the stairwell. If anyone's still down there, I want them alive for questioning." Sokolov nodded and moved to relay the orders. Petrov walked to the stairwell entrance. The collapsed wall section had been cleared away, revealing a doorway that had been deliberately concealed. Beyond it, concrete steps descended into darkness. Not complete darkness, though. From somewhere far below, a faint yellow glow reflected off the walls. And yes, now that he was close, he could smell it. Antiseptic, chemical. And underneath, something that made his stomach turn. He'd smelled death in many forms. This was something else. This was decay while still alive. Lieutenant Yevgeny Belov arrived 40 minutes later with 3 NKVD soldiers and a translator. A nervous-looking private named Konstantin, who'd been a German literature student before the war. Belov was older than Petrov, maybe 40, with a kind of face that gave away nothing. He'd been NKVD since before the war, which meant he'd seen things that made combat look clean. "Show me," Belov said, without preamble. They gathered at the stairwell entrance. Petrov, Belov, Volkov, Sokolov, Konstantin the translator, and 6 armed soldiers. Petrov had ordered electric torches brought down from the supply depot. The yellow glow from below wasn't enough to trust. "The door is 2 levels down," Petrov explained. "Steel, reinforced. The facility appears to extend at least 3 levels, possibly more." Belov examined the twisted door frame with the SS markings. "Führer's Sonderprojekt," he read aloud. His German was better than Petrov expected. special projects directly answerable to Hitler. We found 3 other sites marked like this in the past week. One was a document storage facility. Another was empty, evacuated. The third, he paused. The third we burned to the ground. What was in it? Volkov asked. Belov looked at him. Nothing that needs to be discussed, Lieutenant. They descended. The stairwell was indeed military construction. Poured concrete walls, steel reinforcement visible in places where shells had damaged the upper structure. Emergency lighting strips ran along the walls, powered by that humming generator somewhere below. The air grew colder as they went down, and that smell, antiseptic mixed with something organic and wrong, grew stronger. First level, storage, rows of metal shelving, mostly empty. The Soviets found crates of medical supplies, laboratory glassware, containers marked with chemical formulas that Konstantin struggled to translate. Phenol, he said, examining one label. This one says, I think it's chloroform, and this is adrenaline. These are all medical supplies, or experimental supplies, Belov said quietly. They continued down. The second level opened into a corridor. This was different from above. Finished walls, tile floors, overhead lighting that flickered but held. Doors lined both sides. The first few were offices, ransacked but still containing furniture, filing cabinets, papers scattered everywhere. Belov ordered everything photographed and collected. While soldiers worked, Konstantin began examining documents. His hands shook as he read. This is correspondence between SS Brigade Führer August Hirt and someone named Wolfram Sievers, Konstantin said, dated January 1945. They're discussing, Comrade Lieutenant, they're discussing the transfer of specimens from Natzweiler-Struthof. Petrov knew that name. Natzweiler-Struthof was a concentration camp in Alsace. The 2nd French Armored Division had liberated it in November 1944. The reports that came out had been horrific, even by Eastern Front standards. What kind of specimens? Belov asked. Konstantin went pale. It doesn't specify. It just says, viable subjects selected per the Reichsfuhrer's directive. And there's a reference to Phase 3 trials beginning upon secured arrival. According to Ernst Klees, Auschwitz, the Nazis and the final solution, the SS ran numerous medical experimentation programs throughout the concentration camp system. Dr. Joseph Mengele's twin studies at Auschwitz were perhaps the most infamous. But programs existed at multiple facilities. Some focused on hypothermia, others on infectious diseases, still others on surgical experimentation. What linked them all was the complete dehumanization of victims: Jews, Roma, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, reduced to test subjects. But Phase 3 implied something with a timeline, a progression, a goal. They moved deeper into the 2nd level. More offices, a room that appeared to be a lecture hall with an operating theater at its center. Stainless steel table, overhead lights, drains in the floor. Dried blood in those drains. No one spoke as they documented it. Then, they found the library. It was a large room, walls lined with shelves holding journals, books, binders. A long table dominated the center, covered in open volumes and loose papers. Someone had been working here recently. Coffee cups still sat on the table, their contents evaporated to brown stains. Konstantin moved to the table, scanning documents. These are research notes, he said. Dated, the last entry is April 24th. 4 days ago. He picked up a journal, flipped through pages. His face went from pale to gray. What is it? Petrov demanded. They were combining things, Konstantin whispered. Genetic material. They reference Mendel's laws, but they're talking about forced evolution, accelerated mutation. The terminology is beyond me, but they're describing experiments on human subjects. Injection protocols, surgical modifications. And the results, he set the journal down like it burned his hands. The results are described in terms of percentage of viability, percentage of controlled behavioral modification. They're talking about people like laboratory rats. Belov stepped forward and began examining the shelves. He pulled down binders, flipped through them. These are personnel files, he said. Subjects. Each one has photographs, measurements, medical history. He opened one. The photograph showed a young man, maybe 20, staring at the camera with hollow eyes. Across the bottom, stamped in red, Versuch Person, 2847, Phase 2 complete. Test subject, 2847. How many? Petrov asked. Belov scanned the shelves. Hundreds of files, maybe over 1,000. Where are they? Volkov said. If they brought subjects here, where are they now? As if in answer, a sound echoed up from below, distant but clear. A metallic bang, like a door slamming. Then silence. Then another sound. Was that machinery starting up, or something else? Every soldier in the room raised their weapons. The sealed door, Sokolov said. That's below us. Belov moved to the doorway, looked down the corridor toward the stairs. The humming they'd heard since entering had changed pitch, grown louder. And beneath it, something new. A rhythmic thumping. Machinery? Maybe. But it had an irregular quality, organic. We go down, Belov said, but carefully. I want every man with a weapon ready. Petrov, detail 2 men to remain here and continue documentation. The rest come with us. Sir, Konstantin said quietly. There's one more thing. This document here. It's a memo dated April 20th, Hitler's birthday. It's from someone named Bloch, signing as project director. It says that evacuation protocols have been initiated, but core specimens remained in stasis pending final solution approval. And then it says, he swallowed hard. It says, may God forgive us for what we have created, though I fear he abandoned this place long ago. Petrov felt ice in his chest, a Nazi scientist asking for God's forgiveness. Whatever was down there, even its creators had been horrified by it. They moved back to the stairwell. The 3rd level beckoned below, and that sound, that organic, rhythmic thumping, continued. Belov gestured for silence. 6 soldiers started down first, weapons raised, then Belov, then Petrov and Volkov. The sealed door came into view. It was massive, steel, at least 4 inches thick, with a wheel lock like a bank vault. Except this vault was designed to keep something in, not keep people out. The locking wheel had been turned. The door stood slightly ajar. Someone, or something, had opened it from the inside. And from the gap, that chemical smell poured out like breath. Antiseptic, formaldehyde. And underneath, the copper tang of blood. Fresh blood. Belov looked at Petrov. For the first time, the NKVD officer's face showed something. Doubt. Not fear. Doubt about whether they should proceed. But they had orders. The motherland needed to know what the Nazis had been doing, needed to understand what weapons or projects might still pose a threat, needed to document war crimes for the tribunals that would inevitably come. Belov nodded to his men. 2 soldiers approached the door, weapons ready. One reached out and pulled it open. The smell hit them like a physical wave. 3 soldiers gagged. 1 vomited. Beyond the door stretched a corridor, not administrative now. This was purely functional. Concrete walls, caged lighting, pipes running along the ceiling, doors on both sides, each with a small window. And at the end of the corridor, perhaps 30 meters away, another door. That one was open too. In the flickering light, Petrov could see something moving in there. Something large. Forward, Belov whispered. They entered the 3rd level, and the door swung shut behind them with a heavy clang that echoed like a tomb ceiling. The corridor felt wrong. That's the only way Petrov could describe it later. The dimensions were right. Standard military construction, 3 meters wide, adequate clearance. But something about the space itself felt hostile, as if the concrete walls remembered what had happened here and wanted them gone. The doors on either side had small observation windows, each one covered from the inside with what looked like steel plates welded over the glass. Someone had wanted to make sure no one could see in, or more disturbingly, that nothing could see out. Belov stopped at the first door. A placard read, Quarantinekammer 1, Quarantine Chamber 1. Open it, he ordered. One of his NKVD soldiers worked the lock, simple but heavy. The door swung inward with a creak that set everyone's teeth on edge. Flashlight beams cut into darkness. It was a cell, 2 meters by 3, concrete walls, a drain in the floor, metal restraint loops bolted to the wall at various heights, and covering every surface, the walls, the ceiling, even parts of the floor, were scratches, deep gouges in the concrete, as if someone had clawed at the walls until their fingers broke. Number, not someone. The marks were wrong, too wide. The spacing between the gouges suggested fingers, but fingers that were too long, too strong. Fingers that had torn through concrete like it was plaster. "Mother of God," Volkov whispered. Konstantin translated the writing on the walls. Someone had used blood, or something dark and organic, to write in German. Bitte totemisch, bittiv, butten, bitzeit. "Please kill me," Konstantin said quietly, written over and over. They checked the next 3 cells, all the same, restraint points, scratches, desperate writing in blood. One cell had a human tooth embedded in the wall, cracked from the impact of something, smashing their face against the concrete. "They kept them here," Petrov said. "After whatever they did to them, they kept them locked up." "Like cages at a zoo," Sokolov added, his voice hollow. The corridor continued. They passed more cells, 12 in total, 6 on each side. At the end, that open door beckoned. The movement Petrov had seen earlier had stopped. Now there was only that rhythmic thumping sound, louder here, and behind it, another sound. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing that whistled and gurgled. Belov raised his hand. The unit halted. He pointed to 3 soldiers. They would enter first. They nodded, checked their weapons, moved forward. The room beyond was enormous, not a cell or a chamber. This was a full laboratory. The flashlight beams swept across rows of equipment that would have looked at home in any modern research facility. Microscopes, centrifuges, refrigeration units still humming with power, banks of electrical equipment with dials and gauges, stainless steel tables, glass cabinets filled with instruments, IV stands, monitoring equipment. But it was the far side of the room that made them stop. Cylinders, 6 of them, each one perhaps 2 meters tall and a meter in diameter. They stood in a row against the back wall, connected to a network of pipes and electrical conduits. 5 were dark, their contents invisible behind frosted glass. The 6th was illuminated from within, casting a sickly green glow across the laboratory. And inside that 6th cylinder, something moved. "Advance slowly," Belov commanded. His voice was steady, but Petrov saw his hand tighten on his pistol. They spread out, forming a semicircle as they approached. The breathing sound came from the illuminated cylinder. As they got closer, details emerged through the frosted glass. It had been human once. The thing inside the cylinder was suspended in clear fluid, some kind of preservation solution or life support medium. Tubes ran into its body at multiple points. Its eyes, dear God, it had 3 eyes, the 3rd one offset above the normal 2, were closed. Its mouth hung open, revealing teeth that were too large, too sharp, filed or grown into points. Its arms were wrong, too long, the joints bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. The hands had 6 fingers each, and those fingers ended in what looked like claws. But worst of all was the torso. It had been opened surgically. Petrov could see the neat incision scars, and things had been put inside. He could see additional organs through the pale skin, organs that pulsed and moved with their own rhythm. The breathing sound came from multiple sets of lungs, working in sequence. Konstantin vomited. No one blamed him. "Is it alive?" Volkov asked, his voice barely a whisper. As if in answer, the thing's eyes opened, all 3 of them. They were yellow, with vertical pupils like a cat. They fixed on Petrov. The mouth moved, the breathing changed, and then it spoke. "Hilf mir, help me." The voice was human, male, young, Underneath all the modifications, all the horror, there was still a person in there. A person who knew what had been done to them. A person who was conscious, aware, trapped in a body that had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Jesus Christ, one of the soldiers said. Belov moved closer to the cylinder, examining the control panel beside it. Numbers glowed on small displays. German text labeled various functions. "This is maintaining its life," he said. "These readouts, heart rate, respiration, blood pressure. Multiple readouts for each. It has more than one heart." "How is that possible?" Petrov asked. "Transplantation," Konstantin said quietly. He'd recovered enough to examine documents on a nearby table. They were combining human subjects, taking organs from multiple people and putting them into single bodies. And not just organs, bone grafts, muscle tissue. They were trying to create, he searched for words. Super soldiers? Number, it's more than that. They were trying to create something beyond human, something stronger, faster, more resilient. Petrov remembered reading about Dr. Joseph Mengele's experiments at Auschwitz. Mengele had been obsessed with twins, with understanding heredity and genetic potential. But those were crude experiments, injecting dyes into eyes, trying to change eye color, amputations, unnecessary surgeries. Evil, certainly, but primitive. This was different. This was systematic, scientific. These people, whoever led this project, had taken Nazi racial pseudoscience to its logical, horrifying conclusion. If the Aryan was meant to be the master race, why not make them actually superhuman? Why not rebuild the human body entirely? According to subsequent research, including Annie Jacobson's Operation Paperclip, the Allies discovered numerous Nazi scientific programs in the final days of the war that pushed ethical boundaries beyond recognition. Rocket programs, chemical weapons, biological research. The Americans recruited many of these scientists after the war, bringing them to the US for their expertise. But some programs were deemed too disturbing, too morally repugnant to ever see the light of day. "Check the other cylinders," Belov ordered. They moved down the line. The second cylinder was dark, but they could make out a shape inside. Smaller, possibly female, also floating in suspension. The third cylinder appeared empty until they shone lights directly into it and saw the thing at the bottom, collapsed on itself, clearly dead. The fourth and fifth were similar, failed experiments that had died but been kept for study. The sixth cylinder at the end drew Petrov's attention. It was different from the others, larger, reinforced with external metal bands. The glass was darker, harder to see through. But when Sokolov shone his torch directly at it, something massive moved inside. "Back away," Belov snapped. The thing inside slammed against the glass. The entire cylinder shook. Cracks appeared in the reinforced material. Whatever was inside was huge, at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders that spanned the entire diameter of the cylinder. Petrov caught a glimpse of a face that might have been human once, but was now distorted beyond recognition. The skull had been modified, expanded. The jaw protruded like an ape's. It hit the glass again. More cracks. The cylinder's structural integrity was failing. "We need to get out," Petrov said. "Now." "Wait," Konstantin said from across the laboratory. He was standing at a desk, holding a file folder. "This is a project summary, dated April 22nd, 2 days after Hitler's birthday. It says they were preparing these specimens for deployment." "Deployment where?" Belov demanded. The document references emergency defensive protocols and final deterrent options. They were going to release these things. Into the city, into the battle. Konstantin looked up, his face ashen. They were going to unleash them on the Soviet army. The massive cylinder shook again. This time the glass cracked completely down one side. Fluid began to leak out, pooling on the floor. The breathing sound from inside changed, faster, more agitated. The thing was waking up. "Everyone out!" Belov shouted. "Back to the corridor. Now!" They ran. Behind them, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the laboratory. Then a roar. Deep, powerful, inhuman. The thing in the sixth cylinder was free, and somewhere in the facility, deep below them, machinery continued to hum. Because the thing they'd freed, the thing that was now loose in the laboratory, it wasn't the only one. The file Constantine had been holding slipped from his fingers as they ran. It fell open on the floor, revealing a schematic, a facility map. The third level wasn't the bottom. There were 2 more levels below, and according to the map, level 4 was labeled Mass Breeding Facility. They hadn't found a laboratory. They'd found a factory, and it had been running, unattended, for 4 days. They made it to the corridor before the first scream. One of Belov's NKVD soldiers, a man named Alexei, Petrov thought, though everything was chaos now, had been lashed through the laboratory door. He was pulling it shut when something massive slammed into it from the other side. The door flew open, and Alexei went sprawling. The thing that emerged was barely recognizable as having once been human. It stood perhaps 7 feet tall, hunched because its spine had been modified, extended vertebrae creating a predatory stoop. Its skin was gray-white from the preservation fluid, but underneath, Petrov could see massive muscle development, the kind that shouldn't be possible without the body tearing itself apart. The arms hung almost to its knees, ending in hands that were more like claws. Its face had been split open and rebuilt. The jaw jutted forward, filled with teeth that had been filed or replaced with metal points. The eyes were recessed deep in the skull, burning with something that might have been intelligence or might have been pure animal rage. It looked at Alexei on the floor. Then it looked at the rest of them, and it smiled. "Fire!" Belov screamed. 6 rifles opened up in the confined corridor. The sound was deafening. Bullets tore into the thing's torso, its legs, its arms. Black ichor mixed with red blood sprayed across the walls. The creature staggered backward, roaring, a sound that was half human scream, half animal bellow. But it didn't fall. It charged. "Run!" Petrov shouted, grabbing Volkov and pulling him toward the sealed door they'd entered through. Behind them, Alexei was scrambling to his feet, but he was too slow. The creature's clawed hand caught him by the throat and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. There was a wet crunch. Alexei's scream cut off mid-breath. The team ran. The corridor felt twice as long as it had coming in. Behind them, the creature dropped Alexei's body and came after them, moving in that horrible hunched lope, impossibly fast for something so massive. Its breathing was that same whistled gurgle they'd heard in the cylinder, multiple sets of lungs working in disjointed rhythm. Sokolov reached the door first, grabbed the wheel lock, and pulled. It didn't move. "It's locked!" he shouted. "From the outside!" "Blast it!" Belov ordered. One of the soldiers, a combat engineer named Pavel, pulled a small explosive charge from his pack. His hands shook as he tried to set it against the lock mechanism. The creature was 20 meters away. 15. 10. "Pavel!" Petrov raised his rifle and fired. The bullets hit the creature in the chest, slowing it. More soldiers fired. The creature roared again, stumbling, but still coming. Pavel got the charge set. "Clear!" They pressed against the walls. The explosion was small but focused, blowing the lock mechanism to pieces. The door swung open. They poured through into the stairwell just as the creature lunged. Belov was last through. The creature's claws raked across the doorframe, missing him by inches. 4 soldiers slammed the door shut. There was no lock on this side, just the twisted remains of the mechanism. They held it closed while the creature threw itself against the steel. The door shuddered with each impact. Dents appeared in the metal. "It'll get through," Volkov said. "That door won't hold." Belov looked at the ceiling. "The building above is partially collapsed. We bring down rubble, seal this level completely." "Sir," Constantine said quietly. He was sitting against the wall, his face gray with shock. "The map, the breeding facility. If there are more of those things down there, then we bury them," Belov said flatly. "We bury this entire place and we never speak of it again." Another impact. The door was buckling. Whatever modifications the Nazis had made to that creature, they'd given it superhuman strength. The door wouldn't last much longer. Petrov made a decision. "Get everyone up to ground level. Belov, set demolition charges throughout the upper floors. Bring the whole building down on top of this place. Captain," one of the soldiers said. "There might be others down there. Prisoners, survivors who need—" "There are no survivors," Petrov snapped. "Only victims. And the kindest thing we can do for them is make sure this place becomes their tomb." The soldier nodded. They all knew he was right. Whatever was in those cylinders, whatever was being bred in the levels below, it couldn't be allowed to reach the surface. They started up the stairs. Behind them, the door finally gave way with a tortured shriek of metal. The creature's roar echoed up the stairwell. Petrov looked back and saw it emerge into the stairwell, saw it begin to climb after them with terrifying speed. "Move!" he shouted. They ran up through the second level without stopping, past the library with its damning files, past the operating theater, up to the first level, the storage area, and there, thank God, the stairs to ground level and daylight. But as they climbed, Petrov heard something that made his blood freeze. More sounds from below. Not from the third level, deeper. From the fourth level, maybe the fifth. Sounds like the one they'd heard. Roaring, but multiple voices. And underneath, something else. Scratching, scraping. Many things moving. The breeding facility was waking up. They burst into the ground floor lobby where Soviet soldiers still stood guard. The men stared at the blood-covered, terrified team emerging from below. "Everyone out," Belov ordered. "Clear the building. Engineering team, I want this structure collapsed in 10 minutes. Petrov grabbed a sergeant. "Get a runner to headquarters. Tell them we need this entire block quarantined. Nothing comes in or out. We're bringing down this building." "Sir, what's down there?" "German biological weapons, experimental subjects. They can't be contained. We're sealing the facility." The word spread quickly. Soviet soldiers had seen terrible things in this war. The camps, the mass graves, the evidence of systematic extermination. They didn't ask questions when ordered to destroy something the Nazis had created. Combat engineers moved into the building with practiced efficiency. They placed charges at structural points, enough to collapse the building inward. Petrov watched from across the street as they worked, his mind still reeling from what he'd seen. Volkov stood beside him, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "Did we really see that, sir? Or are we all losing our minds?" "We saw it," Petrov said quietly. "The question is what we do about it." Belov appeared, his NKVD uniform still splattered with Alexei's blood. "The charges are set. Everyone's clear. We detonate in 2 minutes." "What happens to the documentation?" Petrov asked. "The files on the second level." "Burning with the rest," Belov said. "This facility never existed. Those experiments never happened. The subjects are casualties of war, bodies buried in the rubble of Berlin." "But, Captain," Belov said, his voice low and hard, "think about what we saw. Now think about what would happen if word of this spreads. The Americans or British might try to find other Nazi facilities like this. Hell, our own scientists might want to continue the research. Can you imagine what Stalin would do with creatures like that? Can you imagine them being mass-produced, deployed?" Petrov could imagine it, and the thought made him sick. "Some discoveries should stay buried," Belov continued. "Some knowledge shouldn't be preserved. This is one of them." The engineers gave the signal. Everyone moved back to a safe distance. Belov raised his hand, then dropped it. The charges detonated with a rolling thunder that shook the street. The building's facade cracked, held for a moment, then collapsed inward. 5 stories of stone and concrete crashed down into the underground facility. Dust billowed into the air, thick and choking. The sound was tremendous, the grinding death of a structure eating itself. When the dust began to settle, the building was gone. In its place was a crater filled with rubble. Tons of broken concrete and twisted steel, sealing whatever remained below. Petrov listened. No sounds emerged from beneath. The creatures, if any still lived, were entombed. But as the dust cleared and Soviet soldiers began to disperse, Konstantin approached Petrov and Belov. His face was troubled. "Sir," he said quietly, "when I was reading the files in the library, before we found the laboratory, there was a reference I didn't mention. The project director, this man Block, he wrote about sister facilities. This wasn't the only location." Belov's face went still. "How many?" The document mentioned 3 other sites, one in Poland, one in Austria, and one, Konstantin swallowed, one in the Soviet-occupied zone. East of here, near the Oder River, the implications hung in the air like the settling dust. If this facility had been running unattended for 4 days, continuing its horrific work even after its creators had fled. What about the others? Petrov looked at the rubble. They'd sealed this tomb. But somewhere out there, in the ruins of the Third Reich, other facilities might still be operating. Other creatures might be waking. And the war, officially, was almost over. May 2nd, 1945. 4 days after the Berlin facility was destroyed, Captain Petrov sat in a commandeered German staff car, driving east through a landscape of devastation. The Battle of Berlin had officially ended the previous day, May 1st, with the German surrender. Hitler was confirmed dead, shot in his bunker on April 30th. The war in Europe was effectively over. The formal surrender would come in a week, but Petrov's war wasn't finished. Belov sat beside him, studying a captured German map marked with red circles. After the Berlin facility was destroyed, NKVD had interrogated captured SS officers about experimental programs. Most claimed ignorance. 2 had been more cooperative after appropriate encouragement. One of them, an SS Hauptsturmführer named Werner, had confirmed Konstantin's discovery. There were indeed other facilities. He'd provided coordinates. The site they were heading to was designated Anlage OST-4, Eastern Installation 4. According to Werner, it had been operational until April 28th, the same day they'd discovered the Berlin facility. Then it had gone silent. Volkov and Konstantin rode in a truck behind them, along with a reinforced platoon of Soviet infantry and NKVD security troops. No one was taking chances this time. They'd also brought flamethrowers. Belov had been very specific about that. The facility was located near Zelo, about 70 kilometers east of Berlin. The area had been the site of the Battle of Zelo Heights, one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire Soviet offensive, fought from April 16th to 19th. The Germans had made their last major stand there, and it had cost both sides dearly. Over 30,000 Soviet soldiers had died taking the heights. Now, as they drove through the area, evidence of that battle was everywhere. Burned-out tanks, artillery craters, hastily dug graves marked with crude crosses or red stars, and bodies. Even 2 weeks later, there were still bodies in the fields, bloating in the spring warmth. But something else was wrong with this landscape. "Captain," the driver said nervously. "Sir, have you noticed there are no animals?" Petrov had noticed no birds singing, no crows picking at the corpses, which was unusual. Crows were always at battlefields. No rats, no insects, just silence. "In the bodies," the driver continued, "some of them, they're wrong." Petrov had noticed that too. They'd passed several German corpses that appeared to have been torn apart. Not by artillery or bullets, the wounds were different, ragged, like they'd been attacked by something with claws and teeth. The map coordinates led them to what appeared to be an abandoned industrial complex, a cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. A sign identified it as a chemical processing plant, which might have been true once. Now it was clearly something else. The gates hung open. Burned papers littered the grounds. Someone had tried to destroy documents in a hurry. The main building's door had been blown off its hinges from the inside. Belov deployed troops in a perimeter. Same protocol as Berlin. I go in first with Petrov and a security team. Everyone else stays here unless we call for support. They entered the building. Unlike the Berlin facility, this one hadn't been camouflaged as an administrative office. This was pure industrial. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, harsh lighting, and blood. Lots of blood. Dark stains on the floors, walls, even the ceiling in places. "They fought here," Volkov observed. "Recently. Casings littered the floor. German 7.92mm rounds from Kar 98K rifles and MP40 submachine guns. Someone had made a stand in this entrance hall. The bullet holes in the walls showed they'd been firing at something coming from deeper in the building. They found the first body 20 meters in. German soldier, Wehrmacht by his uniform, or what remained of him. He'd been literally torn in half. His upper body lay near a doorway, his lower half 3 meters away. The expression on his face was one of absolute terror. "Jesus," one of the Soviet soldiers whispered. They found more bodies as they progressed, all German, scientists in white coats, SS guards, regular Wehrmacht soldiers, all killed with extreme violence, throats torn out, limbs ripped off, bodies that had been literally pulled apart. And the wounds were fresh. The blood was only a few days old, some of it still sticky. Konstantin was translating papers they found scattered throughout the halls. "This is a daily log," he said, his voice shaking. April 27th. It says subjects in chambers 7 through 12 showing increased aggression, sedation protocols failing. Recommend immediate termination of Phase 4 specimens before evacuation. "Did they terminate them?" Petrov asked. Konstantin found another page. April 28th, 0600 hours. Containment breach in Chamber 9. Security responding. Director Block has ordered emergency evacuation. All non-essential personnel to evacuate immediately. That's the last entry. Block. The same name from the Berlin facility, the project director who'd asked for God's forgiveness. They descended into the underground levels. This facility was larger than Berlin's. 5 levels, all underground, all devoted to the same horrific research. They found laboratories filled with equipment, operating theaters, dormitories where staff had lived, and cells. Dozens of cells, all of them empty, all of them with their doors torn open from the inside. On the 4th level, they found what might have been a control room, banks of switches and valves, all labeled in German. Konstantin examined the panels. "This controlled the sedation systems," he said. "They pumped anesthetic gas into the cells to keep the subjects docile. And this released the cell locks remotely. Someone activated it. Someone opened all the cells at once. Sabotage?" Volkov suggested. "Maybe one of the scientists had a crisis of conscience? Or maybe," Belov said quietly, "one of the subjects got smart enough to figure it out." That thought hung in the air. The creatures in Berlin had been modified for physical superiority. But what if some had been modified for enhanced cognition? What if the Nazis had accidentally created something that could think, plan, and reason beyond human capacity? They found the director's office on the 5th level. Dr. Heinrich Block, according to the nameplate. The office had been ransacked, files torn open, papers everywhere. But on the desk sat a journal, deliberately placed and left open. Konstantin read aloud. April 28th, 1945. It is finished. Not the war, that was lost months ago, but the project, our great work, our sin. I have opened the cells, all of them. I have released 43 subjects into the facility. By the time anyone reads this, they will have killed everyone here, as they should, as we deserve. I believed we were creating the future, a new form of human being, free from weakness, free from the limitations of flesh. The Führer's vision made real, the Übermensch, the superior man. We succeeded beyond our dreams and created a nightmare. The subjects in the later phases are not human anymore. They think, they feel, but they are not us. Subject 2987, we called him Eric. He had a name once. He spoke to me yesterday. He asked me why we did this to him, why we took his humanity and made him into a monster. I had no answer. They are stronger than us, faster, more resilient, but they are also in constant pain. The modifications we made, the additional organs, the altered skeletal structure, the neural augmentations, they were never meant to work together. The body fights itself. They live in agony, and yet they will survive. They will escape this place. Perhaps they will die in the forests. Perhaps they will be killed by Soviet soldiers. But perhaps some will survive. Perhaps they will breed. Perhaps our sin will spread. I am sorry. To God, to the subjects, to the world. We thought we were playing God. We were only playing at being human. My pistol sits before me. I will not wait for them to come. H. Block. The silence after Konstantin finished reading was absolute. Petrov looked around the office. On the wall was a photograph, staff photo from what looked like 1943. 20 people in white coats, standing proud before the facility. Block was in the center, a thin man with glasses and a weak smile. They'd all believed they were doing important work, scientific advancement, creating the master race. Now they were all dead, killed by their own creations. "So, where are they?" Volkov asked. "The subjects. If they broke out 4 days ago, where did they go?" Belov examined the facility map on the wall. The complex has multiple exits, storm drains, ventilation shafts large enough to crawl through. If they were intelligent enough to open the cells, they were intelligent enough to escape. "Into the countryside," Petrov said, "into an area that saw some of the heaviest fighting of the war. A landscape already full of bodies and chaos, where 43 creatures that used to be human could disappear." They found the final piece of the puzzle on a table near the exit, a shipping manifest dated April 15th, before the facility was evacuated. It detailed the transfer of 12 viable specimens to Enlage West 2 and 8 specimens to Enlage Sud 1, Western Installation 2, Southern Installation 1, the other facilities Werner had mentioned. "How many specimens total?" Petrov asked. Konstantin did quick math based on the documents they'd gathered. The Berlin facility had at least 30 in various stages of completion. This facility released 43. The manifest suggests 20 were transferred to other sites. And if those other sites had their own research programs, he looked up. Potentially over 100 of these things were created, and we don't know where most of them are. A sound from outside made them all freeze. Not the normal sounds of soldiers moving around, something else, a howl, distant, carried on the wind. It didn't sound quite like a wolf, didn't sound quite human either. Then another howl answered it, from a different direction, and another, and another. They weren't alone in this landscape. "Back to the vehicles," Belov ordered quietly. "Now, and no one fires unless I give the order. We need to get out of here quietly." They moved through the facility toward the exit. Behind them, in the darkened corridors of the underground levels, something moved in the shadows. Multiple somethings. Watching, waiting. The specimens hadn't left. They'd been waiting for fresh prey to arrive. And now that prey was trying to leave. They made it to the ground floor before the lights went out. All at once. Every bulb in the facility died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Petrov's flashlight beam cut through the black, sweeping across empty corridors and blood-stained walls. "They cut the power," Belov said. "They're hunting us." "How would they know how to—" Volkov began. "They were human once," Konstantin interrupted, his voice tight with fear. "Some of them might remember, might still understand." From somewhere in the darkness behind them, something laughed. Not a human laugh, higher-pitched, with a gurgling quality, but deliberate, intentional, mocking. "Move," Petrov ordered. They ran through the ground floor corridor toward the exit. The platoon outside would be waiting, weapons ready. 50 meters, just 50 meters to safety. The first soldier died before they'd covered 20. Something dropped from the ceiling. Petrov hadn't even seen it clinging there, and landed on Private Mikhail. The creature was smaller than the one in Berlin, perhaps only 6 feet tall, but fast, impossibly fast. It tore Mikhail's throat out before anyone could react, then bounded away into the darkness on all fours, moving like an ape. "Defensive formation," Belov shouted. The remaining soldiers formed a circle, weapons pointing outward, flashlights cutting through the dark. They could see movement now, shapes flitting between doorways, staying just outside the light. Multiple shapes. The creatures were coordinating, working together. "They're pack hunting," Petrov realized, "like wolves." A shape lunged from the left. Rifles barked. The creature took 3 hits to the chest but kept coming. It crashed into a soldier named Boris, bearing him to the ground. The soldier's screams lasted 5 seconds before the creature's jaws closed around his skull. Volkov threw a grenade. The explosion lit up the corridor in brilliant white light, revealing a nightmare tableau. There were at least 6 of them, creatures in various states of modification. One looked almost human, except for its elongated limbs and gray skin. Another was massive, hunched, more beast than man. A third was thin, skeletal, with additional eyes studded along its skull like a spider. The blast caught 2 of them, sent them tumbling. The others scattered, vanishing into rooms and doorways. "Run!" Petrov shouted. "Get to the exit!" They sprinted. The exit door was visible ahead, daylight streaming through. Safety. Behind them, the creatures gave chase. Petrov could hear them, the scrape of claws on concrete, the heavy breathing, the inhuman sounds they made that might have been communication. They burst through the exit into sunlight. The platoon waiting outside opened fire immediately, pouring rounds into the doorway. 2 creatures that had been right behind them were caught in the barrage, their bodies torn apart by concentrated rifle fire. But as the Soviet soldiers fired into the building, Petrov heard screaming from another direction. 3 creatures had come out through a different exit, a side door the platoon hadn't been watching. They'd flanked the Soviet position. Now they were in among the soldiers, moving too fast for organized fire, using their speed and strength to devastating effect. One of them, a female specimen, Petrov realized with horror, had retained almost human features except for the claws and the wrong way her legs bent. She moved through the Soviet line like a dancer, avoiding bullets, killing with surgical precision. A slash here, a bite there. She was toying with them. The flamethrower operator turned, brought his weapon to bear, and fired. Liquid fire engulfed the female specimen. She shrieked, a sound that was definitely human, full of pain and rage, and rolled on the ground, trying to extinguish the flames. 2 soldiers rushed forward and emptied their rifles into her burning body. The other 2 creatures, seeing the flamethrowers, retreated, but not back into the facility. They ran into the surrounding forest, moving with that horrible loping gait that was too fast to track. "Cease fire," Belov ordered. The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was broken only by moans from wounded soldiers and the crackle of burning flesh. Petrov counted bodies. 6 soldiers dead, 4 more wounded, and they'd only killed 4 of the creatures. "Back to the vehicles," Belov said. "We're leaving. Now." They loaded the wounded into trucks. The dead would have to wait. There was no time for retrieval. As they worked, Petrov watched the tree line. Nothing moved, but he could feel them out there, watching, waiting. Konstantin was staring at the facility entrance. "They let us leave," he said quietly. "What?" "Think about it, Captain. They had us trapped in that corridor. Multiple specimens, coordinated attack. They could have overwhelmed us, but they pulled back. They let us reach the exit. Why would they do that?" Konstantin's face was pale. "Because we're not a threat to them. Because they're not trying to kill every human they see. They're trying to survive. And they know we'll tell others. They know we'll report this. Which means the authorities will respond," Petrov finished. "More soldiers, more resources. And in the chaos of trying to hunt down specimens, no one will notice if a few more disappear, if they spread further." It was diabolically clever. If the specimens had truly escaped Nazi control, if they were operating on their own intelligence now, then hiding in plain sight made sense. Post-war Europe was chaos. Millions of displaced persons, entire populations on the move. Bodies everywhere. Who would notice a few more missing people? Who would recognize the signs? They climbed into the vehicles and started driving, but they'd only gone 2 kilometers when they found the road blocked. A German military truck sat sideways across the road, its tires flat. Around it lay bodies, Wehrmacht soldiers and civilians. But these bodies were days old from the look of them, and they'd been partially eaten. "They're using the roads," Volkov said, his voice hollow. "Ambushing travelers. Feeding." Belov got out, examined the scene. He found something in the truck's cab, a Wehrmacht dispatch pouch. Inside were orders dated April 30th, sending the unit west to surrender to American forces rather than Soviet. They'd been trying to escape the war. Instead, they'd run into something worse. "Look at this," one of the soldiers called. He was pointing at marks in the dirt beside the road, footprints. Human-shaped but wrong, too large, too many toes, and there were multiple sets, all heading west. West, toward the American and British zones, toward the refugee columns fleeing the Soviet advance, toward hundreds of thousands of displaced, desperate people who wouldn't ask too many questions about strangers in their midst. According to post-war records, though these were heavily redacted and difficult to access, Soviet military intelligence documented numerous irregular incidents in the spring and summer of 1945. Disappearances in refugee camps, attacks attributed to deserters or bandits, bodies found with unusual wounds. The reports were scattered, filed away in obscure archives, never connected to a larger pattern. But there was a pattern, if you knew what to look for. Petrov stood by the wrecked truck, looking at those footprints heading west, and felt a weight settle onto his shoulders. They'd thought they were fighting the last battle of the war. They'd thought Berlin was the end. But it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. "We need to report this," he said to Belov. "All of it, every detail. The other facilities, the escaped specimens, everything." Belov lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "To whom? Stalin? You think the General Secretary will hear about Nazi super soldiers and decide to destroy them? Or do you think he'll order our scientists to study the research, improve on it, create our own versions? You can't be serious." "I'm absolutely serious, Captain. Think about what we saw. Creatures with enhanced strength, speed, resilience. Creatures that can think, plan, hunt. Now imagine battalions of them. Imagine dropping them behind American lines during the next war. Imagine what the motherland could do with that power." Petrov felt sick. "It's an abomination." "War is an abomination," Belov said flatly. "This is just another weapon, and if we don't study it, someone else will. The Americans are already recruiting Nazi scientists, von Braun and his rocket team, the chemical weapons specialists. You think they'll pass up this research if they find it?" From the forest came another howl, distant but clear. It was answered by others, spread across kilometers. They were communicating, coordinating, spreading out across the German countryside like an infection. "Get in the truck," Belov said. "We're going back to headquarters. I'll write my report. You'll write yours. And then we'll both pray that someone smarter than us knows what to do about this." They drove away from the eastern facility, leaving it intact, leaving the remaining specimens to scatter into the ruins of the Third Reich. Behind them, as the sun began to set, shapes emerged from the forest. They stood at the roadside, watching the Soviet vehicles disappear. Then they turned and melted back into the shadows, heading west, into a broken Europe that had no idea what was coming. May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Captain Petrov sat in a commandeered German office building in Berlin, writing his report. Outside, Soviet soldiers were celebrating the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. Vodka flowed, songs were sung, men who'd fought from Stalingrad to Berlin embraced and wept. Petrov felt nothing but dread. His report covered everything: the Berlin facility, the Eastern installation, the escaped specimens, the evidence of Nazi biological experimentation, the bodies on the road heading west. He documented it with military precision: dates, locations, witness statements, physical evidence. When he finished, he sealed the report and handed it to Belov, who'd been reading his own typed version. "That's it then," Petrov said. "Command will decide what to do." Belov looked at him with something like pity. "Command already knows, Captain. I sent preliminary reports via encrypted radio 4 days ago. The decision has been made." "What decision?" "The facilities are to be destroyed, all physical evidence eliminated, all documents confiscated and classified at the highest level. All personnel involved are to sign non-disclosure agreements under threat of court-martial and execution. And the specimens? The creatures that escaped?" Belov was quiet for a moment. "There will be sweep operations. Discreet. NKVD teams are already being deployed to search the refugee routes, check displaced persons camps. But officially," he met Petrov's eyes, "officially, there are no specimens. The facilities never existed. We found nothing in Berlin but empty buildings and German bodies. That's insane. Those things are out there. They're killing people. Yes. And in a Europe with 8 million displaced persons, 50 million dead, entire cities reduced to rubble. Who's going to notice a few hundred more casualties? Who's going to believe stories about Nazi monsters when there are so many real horrors to document? ... Petrov wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Belov was right. Post-war Europe was drowning in trauma and death. A few mysterious disappearances would be lost in the flood. "Sign here," Belov said, sliding a document across the desk. "You will not speak of what you saw. Not to other soldiers, not to your family, not to anyone. The penalty for violation is death." Petrov signed. What choice did he have? July 1945, Bavaria. Private James Mitchell of the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was on patrol near a displaced persons camp when he found the first body. German civilian, male, approximately 40 years old. The man's chest had been torn open with such force that his ribs were bent outward like a broken cage. Mitchell called for his sergeant. They searched the area and found 2 more bodies, a woman and a teenage boy. Same wounds. Something with incredible strength had literally ripped them apart. Wild animal, Mitchell suggested. Bear, maybe? His sergeant, a veteran of the Italian campaign, shook his head. No bear makes wounds like that. Look at the spacing on those claw marks. That's not an animal paw. Those are fingers. They reported it to CIC, the Counterintelligence Corps. 2 days later, a team arrived from divisional headquarters. They documented the scene, took the bodies, and informed Mitchell and his sergeant that they'd been attacked by displaced German prisoners. Desperate men who'd turned to violence. Mitchell knew that was bullshit, but he also knew not to argue with intelligence officers. The official report filed that day made no mention of the unusual wounds. It joined thousands of other incident reports from the summer of 1945, filed and forgotten. October 1945. Poland. Dr. Sarah Kowalski, working with the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, was treating refugees at a camp near Krakow when she noticed a pattern. Over the previous 2 months, 37 people had disappeared from the camp, all at night, all without a trace. She reported it to the camp authorities. They told her people were leaving voluntarily, trying to reach relatives in other countries. But Kowalski had been tracking patient records. The disappeared weren't leaving their belongings. They weren't telling friends. They were just gone. She started staying up at night, watching. On October 23rd, she saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A figure moved through the camp after curfew. At first, she thought it was human. It walked upright, wore ragged clothes. But the movement was wrong, too fluid, too fast. And when it passed under a light, she saw its face. Gray skin, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, a jaw that protruded too far. It was carrying a child, a little girl who appeared to be sleeping, or drugged, or dead. Kowalski ran for help. By the time she returned with camp guards, the figure was gone. So was the child. The girl's bed was empty, her belongings still there. Kowalski filed a report with UNRRA headquarters. She described what she'd seen in detail. She demanded an investigation. Her report was received, stamped classified, and locked away. She was reassigned to a different camp the following week. When she protested, she was told that if she continued to spread panic-inducing rumors, she would be dismissed from her position. She never spoke of it again publicly, but in her private journals, discovered after her death in 1989, she wrote, "They're real. The things people whisper about in the camps, the monsters, and someone knows about them. Someone is protecting them, or studying them. God help us all." 1952, the Harz Mountains, Germany. A group of hikers discovered a cave system that showed signs of habitation. Inside, they found crude tools, evidence of fires, and, most disturbing, bones. Human bones. Dozens of them, showing marks consistent with butchering. When authorities investigated, they found something else deep in the cave system. A body. recently deceased. It looked almost human, but the skeletal structure was wrong. The skull was elongated. The rib cage held too many ribs. The leg bones showed signs of surgical modification. The body was removed by military personnel, American, according to witnesses. The cave was sealed with explosives. The official explanation was that it was a dangerous archaeological site, unstable and hazardous to explorers. The hikers who discovered it were debriefed by intelligence officers. They were told it was a German soldier who died of injuries during the war, and that the remains were being taken for proper burial. They were advised not to discuss their discovery for the dignity of the deceased. 2 of the hikers accepted this explanation. The third didn't. He told his story to a local newspaper. The newspaper ran a small article, "Mystery Body Found in Harz Mountains." The newspaper's office burned down 3 days later. Arson, according to investigators. The journalist who wrote the article died in the fire. The third hiker moved to Argentina shortly after and never discussed the incident again. 1967. Classified Soviet archives. A researcher named Dmitry Sokolov, son of Sergeant Grigory Sokolov, who'd been present at the Berlin facility in 1945, gained access to restricted military records while working on an official history of the Battle of Berlin. His father had died in 1963, and on his deathbed had told Dmitry about what he'd seen beneath the city. Dmitry didn't believe it, but he searched the archives anyway, looking for confirmation. He found Captain Petrov's original report buried in a sealed file marked Biological Threats, Operation Hush. The report detailed everything: the facilities, the specimens, the escaped subjects. It also contained follow-up reports from NKVD sweep teams operating between 1945 and 1947. The sweep teams had found evidence of specimen activity across Eastern Europe, bodies with unusual wounds, sightings of deformed individuals, disappearances near forests and caves. They'd captured 2 specimens alive. One died within hours of captivity. The other killed 3 NKVD officers before being terminated. Autopsy reports on both specimens confirmed they were human, genetically at least, but heavily modified through surgery, organ transplants, and something the reports called mutagenic treatments. The Soviet scientists who examined them theorized that the Nazi researchers had used experimental compounds, possibly radiation-based or chemical, to induce rapid mutation and change. The final entry in the file was dated December 1947. Active sweep operations discontinued. Specimens assumed either deceased or successfully integrated into civilian populations. Ongoing monitoring protocols established. Dmitry photocopied as much as he could before his access was revoked. 3 days later, he was arrested on charges of espionage. He spent 14 years in a labor camp. The photocopies were never recovered. 1984, East Berlin. Viktor Petrov, now 70 years old and retired from military service, was walking near where the facility had been destroyed in 1945. The area had been rebuilt, apartments, shops, ordinary city life. No trace remained of the rubble crater that had once been there. He was thinking about the war, about Alexei and Boris and the others who died in those underground corridors, about the creatures he'd seen, about the decision to bury it all and stay silent. As he walked, a man approached him, young, maybe 30, dark hair, pale skin. Something about his eyes seemed off. They reflected the streetlights strangely. "Captain Petrov," the man said in perfect Russian. "You were there." In April 1945, below the streets, Petrov's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled. It was almost human. Almost. "My father was there too. He was subject 2847, phase 2. They put him in a cylinder, put tubes in his body, changed him, but he survived. And when they released him, the man's smile widened. He adapted. He learned to hide, to pass as human, and he found others like him, and they had children." "That's impossible," Petrov whispered. "Is it? We're rare, Captain, but we're here, living among you, working jobs, raising families. We've learned to control what they made us. Most of the time, the man's eyes glinted. We wanted you to know, before you die, that your silence didn't protect anyone. It just gave us time to multiply. The man walked away, disappearing into the crowds of East Berlin. Petrov stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what he'd just heard. He died of a heart attack that same night. The official cause was listed as natural causes, related to age and stress. His final words, according to the nurse who attended him, were, "They're still here. God forgive me. They're still here." So, let me level with you. That story, the specifics about Captain Petrov, the Berlin facility, the creatures in cylinders, that's a dramatization. I built it from fragments, from whispers, from documents that may or may not be authentic. I need to be honest about that because intellectual integrity matters, especially when we're talking about something this dark. But here's what is documented and real. The Nazis absolutely ran medical experimentation programs. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's historical fact. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, Dr. Karl Brandt's euthanasia programs, the hypothermia experiments at Dachau, the surgical experiments at Ravensbrück. These are all documented war crimes, testified to at Nuremberg, preserved in archives. The Nazis treated human beings as laboratory specimens. That happened. We also know the Soviets discovered numerous underground facilities in Berlin in April-May 1945. The Soviet archives, what's been declassified, reference biological research installations and experimental subject facilities. The details are sparse. Many files remain classified to this day. Why? What are they hiding? And here's where it gets murky. There are scattered reports, American CIC documents, UNRWA records, German police reports from the late 1940s about unusual incidents in post-war Europe, disappearances near former Nazi facilities, bodies with strange wounds, sightings of deformed individuals. Most were attributed to deserters, bandits, war trauma causing hallucinations. But the pattern is there if you look for it. Operation Paperclip is documented fact. The US recruited over 1,600 Nazi scientists after the war. We brought them to America, gave them new identities, put them to work on our rocket and weapons programs. If we were willing to do that with rocket scientists, what else might we have been willing to study? What research might have been deemed too valuable to destroy, despite its origins? The Soviets did the same thing with their own version, Operation Osoaviakim. They grabbed Nazi scientists by the thousands, forced them to continue their research in the USSR. Chemical weapons, biological agents, experimental aircraft. If there were Nazi programs involving human modification, do you really think Stalin would have ordered them destroyed? Or would he have ordered them continued? I can't prove any specific facility was working on creating modified humans. I can't prove any specimens escaped or survived. The documents I've found, and I've spent years looking, are fragmentary at best, suspicious at worst. Some might be Cold War disinformation. Some might be genuine but misunderstood. But I can tell you this: the Nazis had 12 years, unlimited resources, and zero ethical constraints. They were obsessed with creating the perfect Aryan. They believed in eugenics, in genetic superiority, in engineering the master race. Given what we know they did, the medical experiments, the breeding programs, the systematic extermination, is it really so hard to believe they might have tried to go further? And here's what keeps me up at night. If they did create something, if specimens did escape in the chaos of 1945, where would they be now? The war ended 80 years ago. That's 4 generations. If these things could breed, if they could pass as human most of the time, they'd be everywhere by now. Your neighbor, your co-worker, the guy who serves you coffee. Maybe that's paranoid thinking. Maybe I've been researching dark history for too long, and it's warped my perspective. That's entirely possible. I'm not saying I believe there are genetically modified Nazi super soldiers living among us. I'm saying the historical record has holes in it, and sometimes those holes have teeth. I want to thank my Patreon supporters who make this research possible. Special thanks to the people who've sent me documents and leads. You know who you are. To my YouTube members, thank you for keeping this channel alive. And to everyone else watching, thank you for sticking with me through this dark journey. If you take away one thing from the story, let it be this. During war, when authority figures decide that some people aren't really people, when scientists stop seeing human beings and start seeing test subjects, that's when the real monsters are created. Not in laboratories, in the human heart. The Nazis didn't become evil because they encountered some supernatural force. They became evil because they chose to. They looked at millions of human beings and decided those lives didn't matter. That's the real horror. That's what we need to remember and guard against. Whether there are modified humans walking around today, I honestly don't know. But I know there are plenty of regular humans out there right now, in power, making decisions about who matters and who doesn't, about whose suffering counts and whose doesn't. And that should terrify us more than any story about monsters in the dark. Stay vigilant, stay human, and remember what happened when people forgot to do both. May God be with each and every one of you, no matter what you are dealing with. And I will see you in the next episode.